Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Connected Ministry series. My name is Brad Hill. I'll be your host today. And the series is brought to you by Glue. Glue is the platform that releases the collective might of the faith ecosystem. That includes churches and organizations and ministry leaders, basically folks just like you. And incidentally, if your church is looking for more ways to connect to new people in your community, you need to check out the Glue Explore Connection Program, which is outstanding. You can learn a lot more about that if you go to Glue, that's Gloo, glue.us/reach. And as we continue today in the Connected Ministry series, we're in the middle, as many of you know, of kind of a mini series called the Next Gen Moment. And today I'm really excited. We're joined by Kara Powell. Kara's been a longtime friend and just someone we respect, and she wears a lot of hats. So Kara serves, number one, as the executive director at the Fuller Youth Institute. She's also chief of leadership formation at Fuller Seminary, and she's helping to lead the 10 by 10 collaboration, which is something we'll talk a little bit more about today. Not to mention, Kara's a renowned author and speaker. She's got a passion for the next generation and also for raising up this next generation of leaders at the church. Her most recent book, which is called 3 Big Questions That Shape Your Future. It's kind of a new kind of teen devotional aimed at helping teens not just figure out what to do with their life, but helping them understand what their life means to the world. And I'll ask Kara to make sure I'm describing this properly, but it's an incredible work that she's done, and comes out of some research that we'll talk about. In addition to that, she's also the co-author of the 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager, Growing Young, Sticky Faith. Kara, we could go on, but thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Brad. That was a fantastic introduction. Maybe my ultimate credibility when it comes to young people is I'm a mom of 3 young people myself. Our kids are 22, 20, and 17. So we are in the daily, hourly throes of young adulting, which brings a lot of relevance and fresh questions to our research. That's for sure.
That's great. Yeah, that does give you the ultimate credibility, absolutely, and gives me gray hairs too. So everything in between. So that actually might be a great springboard for us to start. Would love, just for those who maybe haven't been around your work as much, what's making you so passionate about this next generation? You've been about this work for quite a while. Next gen leadership. Talk about where that all comes from for you.
Yeah. Well, how long do we have? That's a big question for me because I really do love young people. You mentioned a few roles I have at Fuller, but what I like to say is that young people are the tree trunk of my passion. So I certainly have other branches, but teenagers, college students, young adults, when I drive by a group of them, say in front of a high school, like I want to go talk to them. When I see them in the shopping mall, when I see them on social media, I get immediately curious. So I think that young people, I have more hope in young people than any other generation. When I think about the future of the church, when I think about the future of our country, any country, I'm most passionate about how God is changing young people to change our world in some really exciting ways. So I think I'm pretty optimistic about today's young people and how they can lead us forward toward an even more robust understanding of the gospel.
That's great. So I mentioned, Kara, your 3 Big Questions book. I want to make sure we drive people to go check that out. But can you summarize just quickly either what the questions are or sort of what the overall theme is coming out of that work?
Yeah, this is research that Brad Griffin and I and a team at the Fuller Youth Institute did to try to understand, in the midst of the surface questions that we see young people asking, what are the deeper questions? What are the questions beneath the questions? So we spent time with a bunch of diverse students. We did a deep dive into the research, and we were able to identify 3 questions that seem most determinative in a young person's life and decisions. Those are, number 1, identity. Who am I? Number 2, belonging. Where do I fit? And number 3, what difference can I make? So identity, belonging, and purpose. And now those are not just young people questions. Those are people questions. Those are questions that, Brad, you and I deal with even over 30. But what I like to say is, for those of us over 30, those questions are more at a low simmer. For young people, they're at a rolling boil. And I'll tell you, as I just start to look at myself, my kids, young people, and life through this lens of identity, belonging, and purpose, I just see these themes everywhere. I'm taking my daughters to Taylor Swift next month. So, we got the worst tickets in SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, but we are going to be there. And so I was watching a Taylor Swift documentary on Netflix a couple nights ago. And sure enough, like so much of that documentary reveals Taylor Swift's struggles. I'm not on a first name basis with her, so we'll call her Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift struggles with identity, belonging, and purpose. So these are just such penetrating questions. And the good news is Jesus offers the best answer. And so what we get to do as leaders, as parents, as caregivers, is we get to journey alongside young people and help them see Jesus's best answers.
So I'm curious, all three of those categories, and maybe this is the parent hat in me coming out, but there it seems like there's a tension between here's a young person coming in, that rolling boil, they're processing, who am I, where do I belong, what's my purpose?
Yeah.
And there may be older adults around them that want to tell them what their identity, belonging, and purpose is versus them leading them to discover it. How do you guide people to navigate that tension?
One of our rules of thumb from that research and that's in the book is never make a statement if you can ask a question instead. Never make a statement if you can ask a question instead. And Brad, I'll tell you, many of the biggest parenting mistakes I make with our three kids is when I come in and make statements instead of ask them questions. And so, how can we as adults take a step back and think about how do we ask questions about a young person's current reality? How we ask questions about what God is inviting that young person into in the midst of their identity, belonging, and purpose? And then how can we help a young person figure out how they live that out this week? So yes, if I could redo my parenting, one of the biggest things I would do differently is ask more questions and make fewer statements.
Wow. Yeah. Ask more questions. Easy to say, hard. But you nailed it. I was asking for a friend on that one.
Yeah, so. Sure. Well, feel free to pass it on to that friend, Brad.
So you and I, Kira, are both friends with David Kinnaman at the Barna Group. And Barna has done some great work around Gen Z specifically. They've named it the most spiritually open generation. I'm curious your take on, number one, just that statement. And then specifically with Gen Z, maybe just expand on ways to partner with them in that spiritual discovery, spiritual formation lane, if they really are the most open.
Yeah. I've just forwarded Barna's Open Generation to another leader that studied yesterday and said, I really think you should pay attention to this. So I'm a huge fan of that data and think it does capture the spiritual openness of young people today and their positive feelings toward Jesus. I mean, some of my favorite data from that study are the attributes that young people assign to Jesus, really, really positive: kind, loving, generous. The attributes that young people assign to the church, not so positive. And so, young people really have positive impressions of Jesus and negative impressions of the church. So we have our work cut out for us with this generation that doesn't trust institutions in general. And the church, sadly, if you look at the institutions young people trust, like the church is neck and neck with politicians. Like that's where we fall on the hierarchy. And so young people, they're just not trusting us. And so we need to earn their trust back. We need to be the loving Jesus followers that I think the New Testament and Old Testament invite us to be. And that's part of what it's going to take to earn credibility with this generation. That, again, the good news is they are open to Jesus. They think positively about Jesus. They're just not so sure about Jesus followers. So that's the opportunity for us.
And the terminology is specific, spiritually open. What does spirituality mean to this generation, do you think? Any differently than maybe the way you and I came up?
Yeah. Well, they would say it largely has to do with, kind of their preferences or what they identify as sometimes in that moment. So a young person's answer is often a little bit more transient, a little bit more fickle. going back to identity, belonging, and purpose, I would say a better answer, and it takes time to get here with a young person, but a better answer is that they would know that those are their big spiritual questions, and that they find a consistent set of answers to those questions. And I would say that Scripture and the gospel of the good news of Jesus Christ offer that consistent set of answers that really last, unlike other things that young people might turn to for temporary relief. Those just don't last. And when you think, Brad, about the mental health challenges we're seeing with this generation, how anxious they are, how stressed they are. They are a generation that has so much potential, oh, for sure, but also so much pain. This is a generation that is often alone and lonely. And so, again, I see all that, though, as an opportunity for we as Jesus following adults to build relationships, to earn credibility. I think some of the really interesting data about young people during the pandemic comes from Springtide Research Institute, where they studied a few thousand 13 to 25-year-olds a year into the pandemic. A year into the pandemic, only 12% of US 13 to 25-year-olds had heard from a religious leader. And that, by the way, isn't just a Christian leader. That's Islamic, Mormon, Jewish. Only 1 out of 10. I mean, that just breaks my heart. I'm not sure if I'm more mad or sad about that data, but I'm both. That only 10% of young people heard from an influential member in a faith community of any faith. When I looked at only Christian young people, that figure increased to 12%. So still abominably low. I shared that with the donor, and he said, well, at least, we as Christians were 20% higher. And I said, you are a glass half full person, because I think that's terrible news. But if that's some of the most depressing data I saw during the pandemic, there's a parallel finding from that same research that I think some of the most encouraging data. 70% of young people right now say they are more open to relationship. So again, this is an opportunity. That's part of why I'm so thrilled about 10 by 10, this national collaboration that launches in October, that hopes to help 10 million young people experience the gospel in the next 10 years. We think that now is a divine window to lovingly build relationships with young people and help them experience the gospel.
That's amazing. Well, and since you went into the mental health, that loneliness, that we're in this whole series, the Connected Ministry series, but we often here have had discussion about disconnection. And I think you just nailed it. Like generationally, it is by many accounts the most connected and simultaneously most disconnected. And what are you seeing? We talked a little bit about Gen Z, then coming up behind that, we have Gen Alpha. What are you seeing in terms of trends of disconnection? And I like that you mentioned relationship. What's the antidote to that? Like, how do we get to them?
Yeah. This generation is both overstimulated and undersupported. So yes, they have more social contacts, surfacey, than previous generations, but it's not that deep support. Brad, I'll go back to identity, belonging, and purpose, because what's fascinating is some of my psychology faculty colleagues at Fuller Seminary, they would say that of those three questions, belonging is the tip of the arrow. That while our identity, belonging, and purpose all shape each other, the one that's ultimately most influential is our sense of belonging. That our belonging shapes our purpose and our identity, and our identity in stronger ways than other relationships among those three. And so, again, I just think young people want to feel safe. That's what we heard from them when we interviewed them. They want to feel safe. They want to have shared experiences. And, part of what we want them to know is that in the midst of them experiencing conditional support in a lot of other circles, that we as Jesus followers, we offer unconditional support as best we can. That's the ultimate kind of community that we can experience, is that agape love community in Christian circles. And I think for this generation, this generation is also the most ethnically diverse generation the U.S. has ever seen. We crossed a line in 2020, according to U.S. Census. In the midst of everything else that happened in 2020, we crossed a line, and under 18 is now 50% young people of color and 50% young people who are white. which again, I think is another wonderful opportunity for us to build relationships across ethnicities and cultures. Young people, they want to be in environments where they see a lot of ethnic and cultural diversity, and they can even lead us forward in that as adults. So I think that's part of what belonging means to young people right now. By and large, there's of course exceptions, but by and large, they want to see the same diversity that they see on their school campuses, they want to see in their churches. And so that's an invitation or a challenge to us to make sure that we're pursuing relationships with people who are different than us.
Yeah. Well, you're making my job easy here. This is exactly where I wanted to turn next. You've been doing some great work, Kara, around serving a diverse set of leaders, looking at every church, um, kind of a, denominationally, geographically, ethnically. Yes, all of those things. What are you seeing? I love that you hit on belonging and that kids look around, they see diversity. Also, just in our experience, leaders in different types of diverse congregations face different challenges, different opportunities. Are there any differences that you mark in terms of the next gen, in one type of community versus another, and how you might want to treat that a little differently?
Yeah, yeah. Well, since we were talking about mental health earlier, I'll say this, that Black young people are seeing the greatest surges in mental health challenges. So, African American community, Black leaders, we just need to be uber aware of what our Black young people are going through. Their rate of suicide has increased more dramatically than any other ethnicity or culture here in the U.S. The other thing to be aware of, this isn't so much ethnicity and culture, but females, girls seem to be especially struggling with mental health challenges, Brad. Um, I don't know a family with teenage girls that isn't dealing with mental health challenges. The data tells me they exist. I can't name one. And
Wow.
by the way, I have teenage girls, so I'm in that. Dave, my husband and I, we are navigating this with our own kids. So I think for churches to be especially sensitive to the support they offer females, males too. I mean, males are just a half step behind. So I don't want to portray it as imbalanced. Both genders, all genders to be sure. But for females in particular, we need to make sure we're that safe space where they feel like they belong and they can grow in their identity and purpose too.
Yeah, think about the incredible tribe that is parents of this generation and the equipping that we can provide. I mean, speaking candidly, I wish my church did more to, number one, just get us together, and number two, equip us more. So I'm thrilled with the work you guys are doing. Um, so I've got a couple questions here as we begin to land the plane. One, just permission to, go in any direction you want. Sort of greatest hope, greatest concern. Like, what are the areas you started off saying you're very hopeful, you're optimistic about the next generation. I mean, when we talk to pastors and leaders, Kara, and if we ask them to enumerate, like, what are the top issues or top areas that you need equipping, always next gen is on that list. So you're in the middle of it. What's hopeful, but also like what's keeping you up at night, as you go out and do this great work?
Yeah. Gosh, I'm going to come back to identity, belonging, and purpose, Brad. You can see how this research has infected and affected me. I would say what gives me the greatest hope is we're seeing churches hand the keys over to young people. We're seeing leaders hand the keys over to young people and see God do incredible things. We try to make this language more common, that we don't want to do ministry for or to young people. We want to do ministry, see ministry done with and by young people. And so it's so inspiring for when we see adults who are looking around at young people and saying, what are your gifts? What are your passions? During the pandemic, one of my teenage daughters really into social media. Our high school pastor basically made her the social media intern for our high school ministry during the pandemic. She thought it was such a big deal when she got the password to the youth ministry's Instagram account. Like, that was the ultimate for her. And so, for pastors and leaders to be looking around at young people and saying, what are you passionate about? What do you want to see God do in and through you? How do you think you're part of God's purposes? That question of purpose. We're seeing really innovative leadership there, and kids being entrepreneurial, adaptive, creative. So that's what encourages me. I think what discourages me is I was asked recently, Kara, summarize all your research, like in a sentence. What would you say? And I would say it basically all boils down to caring, Jesus-centered adults building relationships with young people. That's basically what it all boils down to. And sadly, there are a lot of adults who don't know how to build relationships with adults, aren't motivated to build relationships with with young people, adults that build superficial relationships with young people. And so I actually think young people are more open to adult relationships than adults are right now investing in young people. The deficit is on the adult side, not on the teenage interest side. And so that's why I love Glue and Barna and Fuller, and that we're all trying to say, okay, adults, get involved, disciple others, care about the next generation, and why I think this series is so important.
Are there any practical things, Kara, that you would tell a leader watching this, like, hey, this week, start simple. Here's like a couple things you could try.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest something super radical, okay? This week, listen to a young person. Like, it's so funny, Brad. We have churches pay a lot of money or sometimes a small amount of money for our training. And the first step we have them do is to listen to young people, to grab coffee, to have a meal, to sit on the steps of your church and have a conversation with a young person and just grow in empathy for what they're navigating. We have to spend time with people who are different than us so we can move from, judging them to journeying with them. So yes, the very first step that anybody can take, doesn't cost any money, or maybe the cost of a Coke or a coffee or a boba, is get together with a young person and ask them some questions about their identity, belonging, and purpose. Our book has over 300 questions that any adult can use with a young person, but you can come up with your own and listen and see what you have in common, as well as what they're navigating that is a little unique and not what you're experiencing.
Love that. Yeah, listening and asking more questions. Those seem like really good tips. Well, as we finish out, as we've mentioned several times, connection, disconnection, that's kind of our theme. So what we're talking about, kind of permission to dream. Just want to invite you in to vision cast for a second what a connected church could look like, especially if we lean into the things that you're uncovering here. What might that portend for the future here?
Yeah, nice vocabulary use with portend there, Brad. Way to go. That's like a SAT word.
Well, I have a daughter that's studying for the SATs.
Well, there you go. Well, it shows. It shows. She is rubbing off on you. You must be listening to her. So way to go. Let's see. What was your question? Oh, yeah, dream. Okay, so before I got thrown by the use of the word portend, I was thinking about John 17 as you were raising the question. And I just can't get away from what Jesus says about others will know that we are disciples by the way that we love each other, by the way that we show the kind of unity that is shown in the Trinity, which is this incredible relational unity with yet distinct functions. And so, part of what I'm spending a lot of time on these days through the 10 by 10 collaboration is spending time with Jesus followers who are different than me, who are Catholic, who are Orthodox, who come from different denominations, different parts of the country. And we're aligning on this, that what young people need is relational discipleship radically focused on Jesus. And so we've been able to have conversation and gather over 60 different organizations who are pooling resources through 10 by 10 to offer tested, proven resources to the leaders who need them most. And, it's kind of the beautiful combination of digital scale and relational warmth and support. That's our goal through 10 by 10. So we launched officially on October 10th, 10/10, get it, 2023. But in the meantime, if anybody wants to go to 10by10.org, that's TENX10.org, or come close to that and you'll get there. You can sign up for our ongoing updates so you can hear more about this movement that's building toward October. That is going to be a very diverse, collaborative, ecumenical, passionate, prayer-filled initiative, we think.
So needed. Yeah, we're excited about it. I would just punch in and commend everyone. Go check out the great work there. Also, Kara, FullerYouthInstitute.org. you've been hanging out there for quite a while doing just
Absolutely. FullyWithinSuit.org. We have a host of resources, including a lot of free resources on mental health, on these three big questions. We have a new book coming out in November, Faith Beyond Youth Group. And so you can also sign up to get updates and get in your inbox every Monday the tools that you need to better understand and love this generation.
Love that. Faith Beyond Youth Group. I'm going to check that out.
Great.
Well, Kira, this has been a gift. Thank you so much for just being generous with your time and words and wisdom. Appreciate you being here today.
My pleasure. And good luck to your daughter on her SAT. Woohoo!
Thank you. Yes. Praise God. It'll be over soon.
Yes. And then the college decision process kicks off, Brad. So then there's even more fun.
I hear that comes next. Yes. Exactly. And apparently you have to pay for it or something.
Yeah, so eventually, there's some bills associated with that generally. So
yes. All right. Well, thank you, Kara.
Blessings. And thank you.
And for all of you watching, thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Connected Ministry series. This is, again, where we connect you with ideas, people, opportunities to help you stay connected. We'll see you next time as we're going to wrap up this Next Gen Moment mini-series. And we're excited to be joined by Elise Youngblood from the Barna Group. She's going to talk about generosity and the next gen. So tune in and we will see you then. Thank you.